It is important that anything in this podcast or any other content we produce is not misconstrued as medical advice. We cannot diagnose, prescribe, treat, or cure any animal. In order to do any of that, a veterinarian must see your pet in person to develop what is called the veterinarian client patient relationship, or VCPR.
All right, hi, welcome to the Healing Your Pet podcast. I am Jesse Roberts, and this is Alex Roberts.
Hi!
Last week we talked about switching dog food, and on that same vein, I guess, we're going to talk about switching cat food. And cats are different than dogs in many ways, and one of the most prominent differences between the two is how picky cats can be when it comes to switching food. Cats are creatures of habit, and they become addicted to things and often like their food and their feeding schedule. So what's the deal with switching cats? Why are they so picky?
Yeah, so I guess I'll just elaborate a little by saying, like, from a medical standpoint, are cats being finicky is that the most important difference between dog and cat? No, of course not. There are many, many important differences, but you, as the owner of a cat, and as far as everyday management and owning a cat, it's one of the most important differences because it's really hard to deal with oftentimes. And like, I totally understand that the reality for most people is, I've had this cat 10 plus years. When I got them 10 years ago, maybe I didn't know any better, and I just threw them on some food I bought from the grocery store. And lately I have learned more about nutrition, and I'm really excited to try and do something better for them. And I can't get them to eat anything else, and it's driving me crazy, and I give up. That's a story I hear a lot, or something like that. And yeah, cats are finicky, it's hard to deal with. But one of the main reasons they're that way, it really is that they are naturally that way. This actually sounds a little counterintuitive, but they have very few taste buds. So they actually have a really poor sense of taste. But of course, we all know they have this amazing sense of smell. And with the lack of taste, they can still feel textures, of course. So they're really sensitive to texture, and then smells. So this is why most of us know cats tend to love stinky, nasty, fishy canned food, right? That's stereotypical, oh, cat won't eat, give them stinky fish mush. And we all know that your cat either prefers kibble or prefers canned food. And if it prefers canned food, it prefers certain textures. It either prefers pate, or it prefers chunk, or it prefers minced, etc. And you're not crazy, it's a thing. All cats are like that. Unfortunately, it's not just your cat. So yeah, that's the intro to you're not alone with being frustrated if you've ever tried to change your cat's food, and a little bit about why that's the case.
Yeah, and it's very common when you switch cat food for the first, I guess any time you switch really, they may drive you crazy for a while, may not want to eat their food at all. So let's say you're trying to switch cat food to have them lose weight. What's something you should do in that case? Because if you switch too fast, it could actually be dangerous, right?
Yes, absolutely. And this is a big difference between dogs and cats. So first of all, if you have a cat that's at all overweight and, you're like, okay, I'm going to switch the food, and along with that, we are going to try and get them to lose weight. Great. That's a fabulous goal. But step one is just switching the food. Don't try and get them to lose weight until you've got them happily onto a new diet. And part of that, why this is so important with cats, is, again, unlike dogs, if cats don't eat for even just a couple days, it does not take long. If a cat has any little bit of excess fat in its body and it doesn't eat for a couple days, they love to go into what is called hepatic lipidosis, which is exactly what it sounds like if you speak Latin or Greek. I think it's Latin. I don't know. So it's fatty liver. And lots of species can get a fatty liver, but cats just get it in this particular manner. So you have some form of overweight cat goes on hunger strike, or even just if the amount of food they're given decreases by any significant amount, their body takes all that fat, these fat cells that are being broken down to try and feed itself, and its body thinks it has to go into starvation mode, breaks down the fat, and it essentially clogs up the poor kitty's liver, and it's not good. It is like once they've been diagnosed with it, it's like almost too late. Now we can hospitalize them and do really intensive care, and these days we have a better understanding of how we can be most helpful to these cats, and we actually get food into them right away and try and bring them back from basically the brink of death. And it's expensive, it's the reality. I hate to put that as the number one thing, but thousands to hospitalize them. It's many, many weeks of care, including after they come home from the hospital. It's intensive care for you. It's scary, and it's like torture for the cat on some level. Like, it's horrible, that was my super negative downer statement. But like, you do have to be aware of how scary it can be when we're dealing with cats and eating, and how important it is to keep them eating. So, unlike dogs, which we talked about in the last podcast, and I said in the last podcast, pretty much everything we talked about is pretty much true across the board, dogs and cats. So, almost everything I said there, go back and listen to that one. You can apply all those basics to cats as well. And then now I'm adding on all the extra special things that you need to know for cats as well. So, this is like the super important disclaimer statement is, through this process, the most important thing is your cat must keep eating. And the more overweight your cat is, the more important it is that your cat keeps eating. That's number one. Always keep that in mind.
So, just real quick, I guess, what are some signs to look for to show if a cat is going through hepatic lipidosis?
So, if your cat is acting at all unusual, if they seem lethargic or not themselves at all, and if you're in the process of switching their food, or if you have any life changes even, because cats get so easily stressed out and then decide it's a good idea to not eat. If you've noticed your cat is eating less recently, anything like that, and then you're also noticing your cat is acting differently in any way, it's worth taking them to the veterinarian. When in doubt, it's always worth taking them into your veterinarian, especially with cats. Unfortunately, my experience with hepatic lipidosis has been a lot of times it doesn't get caught until the cat is already jaundiced. There's yellow in their sclera, or the base of their ears a lot of times will turn yellow in cats, that little spot of skin where there's less hair. Their gums will turn yellow. Icteric is the medical term for jaundice. Okay. So, yeah, and that's bad. Like, by the time that's happening, it's bad, but that can happen fast, like within a couple days. So, scary.
So, I guess what we're saying overall is when you switch food, even if you're trying to have them lose weight, just stick to your current feeding. And then we'll cover other like weight loss stuff in a different episode. But for now, this is just the main focus here is just what can we help you how can we help you switch your cat's food without them making your life miserable, really, and what issues to look out for. So, now, a big thing, like I've said before, people tend to free feed cats. That's a very common way to feed cats, is you leave food out for them all day, every day. We don't recommend this. We don't recommend you really feed kibble anyways. But switching your cats from free feeding to a different feeding schedule, first of all, is awful. Like, they will make your life miserable. You know, lots of cats, they even see... if they see daylight at the bottom of their bowl, they're driving you crazy about being fed. They're starving to death just because, you know, there's a nickel-sized hole on the bottom of their cat bowl where there's no food. Now, how abrupt should you ever change their food if you're trying to switch them to a different feeding schedule?
Yeah, so slowly, very, very slowly. In our last podcast, again, kind of generic, but definitely applicable to dogs. The moral of my story was basically there's no such thing as too slow. Oh, we have a visitor. One of our kittens has come to visit. There's no such thing as too slow. Well, with cats, the moral of the story is not only is there no such thing as too slow, but mentally prepare yourself for this to be a long, slow process. That way you set yourself up for success, because it's really easy to get frustrated when it's like, oh, I've got this plan and it's 10 days and that feels like a long time to be committed to having to think about this and calculate food, but prepare yourself for it to be longer than that, because when you're going on cat time, it can be a long time.
Yep, they want it their way.
So, yeah. So, for free feeding explicitly, what I prefer to tell people is, before you even try switching the type of food you feed, try and get your cat on a schedule first. Now, sometimes there are instances of, my cat has this sudden health problem. We have to try and get them onto this new food as safely, as quickly as possible, you know, within the bounds of what is safe. You know, okay, sure, then it's a different story. Well, we can try to go a little faster. But if that's not the case, if we're not in some massive rush to change the food immediately, then I really do say try and get them on a schedule first. We actually only feed our cats once a day. If you can get your cat down to 2 meals a day, that's awesome. Yeah. You know, but make that your goal, you know, but take time doing that. And even, you know, that could almost be its own podcast. That in itself is a long journey. And there's no such thing as too slow. Right. Don't forget that.
And it can be very annoying, because we used to feed our cats twice a day. And for whatever reason, I'm always the chosen one when it comes to begging for food. I don't know what the deal. Literally, it's like that. Like, they will only ever come beg me from food. And it used to be I would sit here working, and like they would get dinner. They get breakfast at 7:30, dinner at 5:30, and at 3:30 every day on the button, cats would start creeping in here. And they would harass me. They'd stand on my computer. They would, you know, sleep on my desk. They would rub their head in my face. It was all just to get me to feed them sooner. So I feel your pain. Switching cat food feeding schedules can really suck. But switching them to 1 meal a day is the best thing ever. Even though now they want to wake me up at 5:30 in the morning to feed me from jumping on, like, from the headboard onto my head. But they don't ever harass her about feeding them, ever. Just me. It's just the weirdest thing. It's been that way since they were babies. It's just bug Dad about it.
Yep.
So, now, switching food types. So if you're going to go from feeding a kibble to a canned food, or even like a canned food to a raw food, extra slow is better, right? And how much would you say is best if you're going to be doing that type of switch?
Yeah, so if you listen to our last podcast and you think, yeah, my cat's really not a picky eater, you know, I'll just try kind of a more quote-unquote like typical schedule for switching food, and we'll go from there. So I recommend my 10-day plan, which we talk about in the podcast prior to this. And that's basically it's 25% change at a time.
Mm-hmm.
So if you're like, yeah, no, that is not at all me, I have your average stereotypical cat. I am not switching my cat's food in 10 days. My go-to in that case is 10% at a time, and in at least 3-day increments. So again, you can go back to the last podcast and see how I break that down. We made like a little diagram thing as a little visual.
I can actually put the graphic in this description for this too.
There you go. Just to give you a visual idea, so it's not all, verbal here. I know that's I don't learn well that way. So, but essentially you do 10% new food, 90% old food for 3 days. Then you do 20% new food, 80% old food for 3 days, etc., 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 until you get onto 100% new food. Now, that sounds absurdly slow, but for many cats, it is still. So that's essentially it's a month, right? Mm-hmm. Then that ends up being. That still is too fast for, I wouldn't say the majority of cats. I'd say a good chunk that ends up working out just fine. But for some cats, that still ends up being too fast. And in that case, I resort to if you, the 10% worked, the 20% worked, and then you tried to go to 30% new food, and they were like, no, I am not having this. You're poisoning me all of a sudden.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, fine. Stick with 20% for longer, right? Stick with 20% for 5 days. Stick with 20% for a week, whatever, longer than that, until they seem like really happy with that 20%. Then maybe go to 25%. Don't go back to 30%, right? Go to 25%. If they seem happy with the 25% for 3 or so days, okay, try the 30% again. Like, it has to go that slowly. If all of that isn't working, we have some little tips and tricks you can try. I just save these as a last resort, only because I try to keep things simple. So all of that time and trying to figure out the percentages of the food might not sound simple to you, mm-hmm. but at least you're not having to massively change your routine or buy a bunch of different new things or, experiment with too many new things. You're really only dealing with this one new variable, it's just the one new food, and it's just how much of that you're giving is the only thing changing. So, for your sanity and trying to keep it simple for your cat in a way too, that's the only reason I recommend just trying to stick with the really slow process, and just resorting to our other little tips and tricks, only if the really slow process just is not working out for you.
Well, I guess since we're on to the next part here of tips and tricks, right? You can give us your best tips and tricks.
All right. So, I'm sorry, I keep dropping a pen on the desk. I need to stop playing with it. It probably sounds annoying. Sorry, okay. Everybody. So, 1. This is a basic one for all cat owners, and a lot of cat owners do know this, so I'm sorry if you're like, yes, I know this, I've done this forever. But in case you don't know, that's okay. Now you can try something new. Cats prefer dishes that are low but wide. So like shallow but wide across, so that they don't have to have their whiskers brushing up against the sides of the dish while they're eating. Because, we all know those whiskers are super sensitive. They're little sensory organs, or at least they are attached to little sensory organs in the skin. So, they don't like them brushing up against things if they're not doing that by choice. So that's a good place to start, honestly. And you may think, okay, cool, but my cat's been eating out of this one dish forever, just fine. Sure, but we might as well do a little bit better if we're trying to switch to a new food that we know is going to be probably going to be a bit challenging to begin with. We might as well just, try and set yourself up for success with that one, because it's such an easy switch to make. And I mean, almost no cat, I don't think I've ever met a cat that preferred eating out of a taller, more narrow dish.
Yep.
Next up, I would say, just because this one is so simple, it's not because, like, a lot of cats love this, but making sure the food you have, or I should say the new food you're mixing in, is super well mixed in with the old food. That's really important. All right, mix really well so that your cat cannot pick out the little bits of the old food and spit back out the bits of the new food, because dogs are good at that. Cats are experts at that. Like, if it is not mixed well, they're not messing around. So if the super duper mixing plan isn't cutting it for you, and this is one where you have to know if your cat is going to like this, you may have to experiment, but sometimes cats do like a little bit more water added to the food. And again, it all boils down to texture and what texture your individual cat does or does not like. So adding a little bit of water in helps that mixture be a little more homogeneous. It kind of forces them to not be able to pick the old chunks out and spit the new chunks back in. But, some cats are going to be like, you added water to my food. You're poisoning me. Disgusting. So You have to know your cat. You might have to experiment with that one a little bit. Next one, kind of taking it up a step. Things you can mix into your cat's food to experiment with. One idea is goat's milk. Not all cats love goat's milk. Some of them really love it, though. So especially if it's something you've tried before and they liked, this would be a great option for you. Just adding in a little bit of goat's milk, and that can kind of replace the water. Like, exact same concept as the water, but if your cat likes goat's milk, cool. It's something tastier than water, makes it a little more appealing. And then along with the things we can mix in idea, whatever favorite treat or favorite food your cat has. So if your cat's favorite treat is some stinky fishy canned food, mix a little bit of it in. If your cat's favorite treat is like nasty, dry, crunchy treats, crunch them into dust and mix a little bit of it in. Whatever it is, try that. Sometimes that really helps. And yet again, that kind of boils down to knowing your cat, knowing what's my cat's favorite treat, what have they really loved in the past that might work here. So this one is especially for if you're trying to switch your cat to a raw diet, especially if they're currently on a kibble, like, we're kind of talking opposite ends of the spectrum. You can take some freeze-dried raw food, because cats tend to prefer the texture of the freeze-dried raw versus the nice hydrated frozen raw. Of course, the hydrated frozen raw is much better for them because of the hydration factor, which we talked about in our cat nutrition episode. But sometimes a good starting point is to take a little bit of freeze-dried raw and sprinkle that in with their old food and kind of slowly work them up from there, get them used to that, just something new in their food even, and that the idea of something new isn't so bad, and then kind of slowly mixing in the frozen raw from there. Now, I'll add, along with that, there is kind of a whole separate plan that I really rarely recommend, but this is kind of the backup plan. Backup. Okay, like last resort. But it's an idea. I have done this a few times that it ended up working out. Basically, if you go back to, I think, our first or second episode, talking about kind of the food pyramid, I guess, as far as like types of food, like from the worst to the best. If you are starting off at kibble now, you can slowly switch your cat to a canned food. And then you can slowly switch your cat to maybe a dehydrated food. And then you can slowly switch your cat to a freeze-dried raw. And then you can slowly switch your cat to a frozen raw. And I mean, that in total can end up being like a year-long process. I mean, talk about a long process. But like I said, I've had it work a couple times, so I'm just putting it out there as kind of a last resort possibility. Last resort, not because it's like terrible for your cat or anything, just because that is a lot of work for you. And I don't want to give you any extra work if it's not necessary. So, and then I guess my last little thoughts here for different ideas to try and convince them that a new food is a great idea. So, if your cat has a favorite toy that you can put food inside of in any way, that's a good one. There are little, like, you know, of course for dogs, there are a million different slow feeder, puzzle feeder, toy slow feeders, you know, knock the ball around and little bits of food slowly come out of it. There's a million of those on the market for dogs. There aren't as many for cats, but there are some for cats, and there are plenty of ideas out there for homemade ones for cats too. Like, you can do this for cats just as easily as you can do it for dogs. It's not like some exclusive dog club only thing. It's 100% a cat thing too. It's just sometimes you have to be a little more creative because there aren't as many widely available. So yeah, favorite toy is like a puzzle feeder or slow feeder. So the other way to kind of utilize a similar idea is hiding little pieces of food around your house. Now, if you have multiple animals in the house, of course, this can be a little challenging. So if you have a dog, you know, you have to hide food up high so that the dog can't reach it, only the cat can reach it, etc. You know, this isn't necessarily doable for everyone, but it's just an idea, and it's really fun. And for households that this works in, sometimes it works like really well. Basically, if you can trigger their hunting instincts, they get excited about it, and they're like, I get to hunt down my food, and they're suddenly excited to eat their food. It sounds kind of silly, but it's definitely a thing. I've seen it work great for some cats. So, and there are actually certain products you can buy that are literally intended for that purpose. You know, if you don't want to just leave little chunks of food sitting out on like windowsills or whatever around your house, or any random dishes. And obviously just remember where you put the food so it doesn't get nasty and stinky and forgotten. That's the disclaimer on that one. So yeah, I think that's it for my big tips and tricks for now. Yeah, I think we can wrap it up.
Okay, well, go ahead and subscribe or like and share and all that stuff. And if you have any requests for any topics, go ahead and comment and ask. You can always listen to just an audio version as well. It's on Spotify, all the podcasting stuff. And this is also good if you know anybody that has any, or they're having any of these issues. Just point them this way. This will just be, as much as this is a regular podcast, this is also something that if you have any of these issues in the future, you can just look back on it and find all these different topics. That's just here to help you along with any issue you have. And at some point, we'll have enough info here for anything. So, all right, well, I think that's all I got. How about you? You good? All right.
I think I'm good.
All right, well, have a good week, and we'll see you next week. Bye.
Bye, all.
Thanks for listening. We'd love your feedback on what you think of the podcast, even the formatting of it. For example, if you prefer a longer or a shorter podcast, let us know. We genuinely want to be as helpful as possible for our listeners. And of course, share this with your friends and family so that we can help their pets live their healthiest lives possible. You can find us wherever you get your podcasts, and we post a video version on the major video streaming platforms. wishing you and your furry family members good health. Bye for now.